The Vino Geek Podcast, wine from a Kiwi perspective. Welcome back to the Vino Geek Podcast. This week we're going to continue that sort of marketing sort of look at things. I didn't feel like I quite hit the mark last week, and just expand on that a little bit. Just after a couple little conversations I had in the last few days, I really feel like there's more to be said on this. There's more to be grown with this, and whether it's just my theories and ideas, or whether this is actually something that can be worked with and built on, we will see. Basically, it's just, at the end of the day, we all want wine to be successful. Everybody in the industry wants wine to be successful. With declining sales and almost like, they talk about a lack of interest from the younger generation. Why is that? Wine companies spending all their money marketing to the wrong people? Are they not spreading their resources out to market to not just their rusted on fans, the older generation, but also newer styles and newer ways of getting to younger people and bringing younger people on board? Is there a disconnect there? Or is it plainly and simply that younger people have to be made more aware of the wine themselves, the stories behind the wines, how they're made, the effort that's gone into them, all of these things. These are just ideas, and I'm going to expand on all of these ideas over this episode, but I just wanted to just release that out here and just, let you permeate and think about that, especially those of you who are just seeing this as a preview as opposed to the introduction to the episode. So yeah, after the break, we'll get into it. Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too. Yeah, where to start? It's always been, are things cool enough for younger people? Are they grabbing their attention? And let's face it, Kiwi wine labels do not do that. They do not grab attention. For the most part, you're looking at the same labels. I talked about this last week, but I double down on it. They don't spend enough money researching what will actually make people pick up their wine. It's been a big bugbear of mine, is that wine companies don't think about getting people to engage with their product. One thing I learned years ago, this was when I was studying. I was actually stewarding for the New Zealand International Chardonnay Challenge, and one of the awards was a label award. And so they had graphic designers that chose the prize winner. And what swung it for them in the end was the fact that from across the room, they saw this particular label. And ironically, it wasn't even a Kiwi wine that won this award. It was an Australian wine, which for the most part, they tend to be more free and a little bit more looser and a bit more risque, if you like, with their branding, with their labeling. So, we can take a lot from that. And that was, when was that? That was was it that long? 2009 anyway, was the was the competition, and that was the thing that had this label that was, you could see it from across the room and it stuck out, and that's what Kiwi wine companies, for the most part, don't do. They don't stand back on a retail shelf and just see what actually stands out, what's going to engage people, what's going to make them pick up that bottle of wine. They're all looking to make these wines that, sure, when they line up their whole lineup of, say, 10 wines, it looks pretty spectacular. It looks very cool and everything else, but the label doesn't stand out. So if the label doesn't stand out on the shelf, are you going to get people to buy your wine? This is my point. So when it comes to younger people, it doesn't necessarily have to be that one that stands out, but you still got to engage with them. You got to have a brand that engages with younger drinkers. You can't just expect them to follow the same rules that the previous generation, their parents have followed, where they have brought on reputation, vintage, variety, what have you. You can't use a blanket rule for every single wine drinker. You know, there has to be some diversity in the way you market, the way you brand your product. You know, maybe have parallel labels, essentially the same wine, but one's appealing to, say, a boomer Gen X crowd, one's appealing to a millennial crowd, you know, and bringing them in that way, you know. And of course, storytelling plays a big part in it. And that's the thing, like I mentioned that in the intro, getting them engaged with the story, making them feel like the story is cool in some way, or reinventing yourself so your story is cooler and more appealing to the younger people. You know, don't sit there and think and rest on your laurels if you're like, sure, you know, you might sell out every year and everything's rosy, but how long is that sustainable for? You know, how long is that sustainable for when there's so many options for younger people to lean on, to drink, to experience? How are you doing? And this goes to New Zealand wine themselves. Are you getting people engaged in drinking the wine? You know, are you making sure the young people are choosing wine over these other things? Are you doing everything you can to make the wine appealing to them, to the next generation, to those, you know, the 20-year-olds of the world, you know, versus, you know, sure, you've looked after the 40 plus, not a problem. But that next generation coming through, you know, have you done enough to look after them to make sure that they're still going to buy these wines to help help the industry survive? But all the numbers shows that they're not buying. So what are you guys doing to make sure that they are going to buy the wine? You know, are you looking at innovative ways to market to these people, to this group, to this generation? Because, you know, they're not going to be there all the time, you know. And all I can see is that, yeah, boring labels, boring story presentation. The stories aren't boring. The stories are great, but it's the way they're presented. They're not presented in a way that is necessarily appealing. I mean, I know this podcast is probably not appealing to the, you know, not appealing to them, and you know, eventually I would have to make sure I appeal to that generation. But at the moment, my target generation is the same target generation you have, but I've got to start future planning. You know, I've got to get this more eyes, more younger people watching this podcast, you know, and you need to do the same thing. So yeah, that whole boring versus cool, find out what appeals to them. You know, is it the alcohol content? Is it natural wine? Do Kiwi wine companies need to focus more on natural wine, minimal intervention? You know, all of these buzzwords. Do they need to start making, you know, wines that just aren't made in the traditional way? Do they need to start branching out and looking at different styles? You know, do they need to make wines that are lower in alcohol or have no alcohol? Is this, you know, find out what this generation wants. You know, because as I said, it's all good and well looking after this generation and giving them what they want. But if you aren't making the shift, where's this generation going to be in 10, 15, 20 years' time? These ones are going to be there. And so you need to start shifting focus. I feel like we as an industry, like the industry as a whole, is being left behind. You know, and I know that there's a resistance. You know, I know working in the restaurant at Lionel's, it's hard to really push the envelope and have those different styles because people aren't quite ready for it. You know, the generation that are the wine buyers aren't really ready for it. They're trying to encourage those ones that aren't necessarily wine drinkers to drink wine and drink these different styles. It's a little bit difficult, but restaurateurs need your help too. It needs to be a reciprocal movement. You need to try it. You need to engage them more. Try to get them to try it. You just need to try wine. I'm sure you've got this plethora and this is the thing. Younger people have all this option. Not just younger people, but there's all these options for alcohol now. It's not just wine and beer in the odd spirit. There's all these RTDs, and I mean, let's face it. Sure, they market themselves as being, more pure and everything else. The fact of the matter is, they're just using less sugar. They're not putting sugar in. It's the same principle of any RTD. It's just less sugar. Where wine is still a natural product, especially if you get those ones using regenerative viticulture. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about with that, there's a previous episode, go and check it out. Basically, beyond organics, it's doing everything holistically and naturally so that the thing in your bottle is as pure and natural as possible, and it's the best quality that they can make because they're doing all these measures to look after what's around the vine to help the vine produce the best it can, not supporting it, making it support itself. So that's the thing, like, you can, if they want a more natural product, they want that natural product. Market wine is generally being a more natural product than these RTDs that they're drinking. Make it more appealing and show them that there's styles that they can get around, that they're not just XYZ that the parents drank. There's all these other styles that are very much like drinking RTDs. I know Known Unknown down in New Plymouth. Is it New Plymouth? He has a piquette, which is he rehydrates the skins that's left over after fermentation of the whites. He soaks them and he draws out the alcohol, draws out some more flavour and everything else. So there's an option. More piquette style wines. There's a pet nat. Another style, but we've got to market it properly. You've got to get it out to these ones that would find it appealing to drink a pet nat. Just in more of a rawer state. And this is what we need to encourage. Just a dry throat there. Just clean that up. So it's not all about price. Younger people aren't really faced about price, but they just want value. Just like everybody, just want bang for their buck. They just see value in different things. So you've got to make your product more valuable to them. You've got to make it that they're willing to spend the equivalent on a bottle of wine as they would a couple of cocktails. It's got to be appealing. It's got to have that cool factor, and you've got to make it have that. A bottle of wine, Kiwi wine, for the most part, isn't that appealing to, I've got a bottle of wine here that is the wine of the week. That's not very appealing, even though it's got these gold stickers on and it's a really good price. It's not appealing, It's not something that they're going to go out and buy because the label sucks. Sorry, Seifried, but your Old Coach Road, which could be your brand that you rebrand and you market to these and do fun things, do different things, it's not appealing. The gold stickers help it, but who is it helping? So just appeal to these people, them more. It's all these are theories, obviously, but there's validity, there's thought behind them. I'm not just throwing these out willy-nilly. They've been stewing around in my head for a while because there's all this talk about declining sales and smaller producers are struggling, and why are they struggling? What's the governing body doing? Why are all these governing bodies of these organizations not doing more to help the people that they're supposed to be. You know, I feel like I shouldn't be going down this path, but I am. You know, just the whole, why is it that, they want their name and lights, these organizations, they want the kudos, they want everything else, but what physically are they doing to help New Zealand, like the wine companies themselves, all the restaurateurs, all the sommeliers, whatever, depending on what the organisation is? Why are they just doing it all for themselves, the kudos for themselves? That's how it feels to me, looking from the outside, is that it's designed, they've designed these to give themselves all the kudos. When why aren't they doing more to support? Why are they not telling more of the stories? Why are they not approaching myself or, sorry, I can't, the New Zealand Wine Podcast and things like this, and getting more of the stories out there and really marketing the crap out of podcasters, of social media producers, like, all these ones doing all these little things themselves. Why are you not backing it? Others, people, other organizations are really embracing podcasters and social media outlet providers because they're another avenue of marketing to these other people, to these different generations. Get them helping you, helping you'll reach more, help your clients, the wine companies. I'm talking about New Zealand Wine right now, helping your wine companies understand, okay, this is how I can help myself as well. I can do these slightly different things, knowing that marketing, there's some help for marketing. There's some help getting the brand out there. There's help to make it more appealing to the masses, to the people that are drinking less wine. Why are they drinking less wine? Are there, as I said, there's a few things that I've rattled off, but as I said, there's so much competition. Why is New Zealand Wine not making sure that New Zealand Wine is the front runner in this competition, that they're not being looked at first? There's all this wine out there, there's all these wine companies out there, and sure, it looks awesome, and basically everybody's sustainable, and they're more and more converting to organics and all of this thing, and the buzzword is still New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. But then there's the evolution of other varieties. The international talkers talking about other varieties, Wine Blast podcasts. They were pumping up New Zealand wine and other wine styles from New Zealand. That's all good and well, but where's it being pumped up domestically? I don't see anything that's really saying, yeah, this is appealing, trying to get more people, trying to make it cool, trying to make wine cool. It seems to be like, sure, all the wineries work together and they're very helpful and cooperative with each other, and they will always help one another if they're in a bind. But it doesn't feel like the governing body really wants to help them. They, if they did, there'd be more done to market them. There'd be more done to make sure that these companies aren't struggling. These small guys aren't struggling. It's all dog eat dog. It's all the big guys doing their thing, but they're just making the same boring wine. They don't even try to make something more appealing to the next generation. They're just like, this is what we do, suck it up and deal with it. And we're still making bucket loads because we only make bucket loads because we're overseas owned and it's all great and everything else. At the end of the day, the New Zealand market for them is nothing, and they're the ones that probably have the lion's share of the New Zealand market, which is very frustrating for someone like myself, where there's small companies that are trying to battle away and aren't getting any help, are struggling. And why are they struggling? Because there's no help. And there's no just saying, hey guys, if you want this to be more appealing, try this, this, and this. Because as I said last week in last week's episode, I had a discussion with a wine company, and it was really interesting because I felt like they were looking at the wrong things and how to repackage their wine, and they weren't thinking of the people. They're just thinking of not necessarily themselves, but they're thinking of their rusted on people that buy their wine and how they would perceive it, rather than making sure that your um your your customer base stays constant and that it keeps growing, and you're keeping evolving. You're encouraging you're attracting new people to your product. I just feel like it was very much like, this is our lane, we're going to stay in our lane and do our lane. And sure, that works, but you still have to diversify. You still have to have something that is a point of difference. You can't just do the same as everybody else. I mean, when I saw the mock-up of the labels, I just thought, it looks like everybody else. Sure, they do have one particular thing that is very unique to them, but everything else and what they're trying to do just goes with everybody else. That's not what is going to attract the casual wine drinker or new wine drinker, or just someone who's elapsed on drinking wine and has moved to other things. That's not going to attract them, because if you look at what they're drinking, it's a much more attractively packaged. It's much cooler. They've made it out to be a more natural product when it's not a more natural product than wine. These things aren't fermented to produce the alcohol. The alcohol's just added. And when they're adding alcohol, they tend to look for the cheapest alcohol they can, which is whey spirit. Just the byproduct of the dairy industry. So getting the cheapest alcohol they can, and they flavor it. Sure, they might not flavor it with sugar, but they're flavoring it with other things that aren't necessarily real fruit. You get sucked into all the marketing saying that they are actually natural, they're really good for you, rah-de-rah-de-rah, they're as good as you can get for an alcoholic beverage, when wine is the best thing, and we're not telling the story of that. So yeah, that's my big rant, and I've gone on forever on this as well, but I just need to make it clear that we need to do better. People need to look at wine again as being cooler than it is, or cooler than they think it is, I should say, and cooler than other things, when what they're wanting is a more natural product, a low sugar product, rah-de-rah-de-rah. When you get a dry wine, it's low sugar, it's natural. Don't get sucked into all these myths and misconceptions that most of the wine are bad for you. They're not. Most wine, there's no meanies in it apart from the alcohol, which, if you're going to drink alcohol, you're going to have the meanies. If you don't want to drink alcohol, that's a whole nother thing. It'll be a whole another episode talking about non-alcoholic wine, which we will get into at some stage. But yeah, I'm going to leave it there. After the break, we'll have our wine of the week.
Just taking a quick pause in the episode to remind you to like, subscribe, comment, and come and follow me on socials too.
It's something I should really do each week. I'm actually going to do a live analysis of the wine rather than tasting a wine a week ago and then talking to you about it without any real interaction. So here it is here. So it's the Old Coach Road Riesling 2024. Now, for those of you who don't know, Old Coach Road is produced by Seifried down in Nelson. We've been going for a fair while now, and one of their sort of thanks to their, I believe it's Austrian descent, I should really know this, but Riesling is one of those varieties they do well. And so yeah, looking at the color, very pale, slight sort of, it's like very light yellow, hint there, but very clear, very young, obviously, 24. So. Yeah, and then on the nose, it's got a touch of that sort of almost new plastic. Not quite there, but yeah, very much that white florals, white fruits, so sort of citrus as well. Yeah, very, very straight up and down Riesling, which when I tell you the price, you just fall over and just go, yeah, very acceptable. You know, not super complexing, but very, very pleasant. Palate is light, fresh, has a little bit of fruit sweetness there, but it is dry finishing, so like moreish, puckering citrus dry finishing. No, yeah, just very pleasant, very easy drinking, not too, not too much of anything. There's a lovely freshness to it, lovely fresh acidity, and as I said, that balance of that sweetness with that acidity, which is classic Riesling. So it needs to be there, and Riesling should be cooler because you can have it in a variety of styles. This is sort of an off-dry style, dry finishing, but still that lovely fruit up front. So it's not gonna, it shouldn't offend too many people. It should be quite broadly appealing. Now, think seafood, think salads, easy light food, and it $11.99, too cheap. So yeah, amongst it, that's our wine of the week. Until next time, ora kia hua.